Hello, my name is Abby Walker, and I am a professor of linguistics in the Department of English at Virginia Tech. As a linguist, when I think about Alice in Wonderland, the first thing that comes to my mind is a conversation that happens between Humpty Dumpty and Alice in Through the Looking Glass. Humpty has just finished arguing about what days of the year you get birthday presents on, and then he finishes his story with, "That's glory for you." Alice is confused and says, "I don't know what you mean by glory." Humpty, we're told with a contemptuous smile, says, "Of course you don't, till I tell you. I mean, there's a nice knockdown argument for you." Alice is perplexed, but glory doesn't mean a nice knockdown argument. When I use a word, it means just what I want it to mean, no more, no less. The question is, says Alice, is whether you can make words mean so many things. The question is, Humpty replies, which is to be master. That is all. There's so much we could talk about in this conversation, including who gets the authority to decide what words mean. But what I want to do in this video is talk more about word meanings and kind of what a word meaning is made of. So traditional componential analysis, I would say that the meaning of a word like girl is that it has these certain like kind of components of meaning to it. There is, it's human, it's young, and it's female. In some accounts, people would just put minus male there, but we're not going to do that. So glory, we could imagine maybe means something like plus high honor, plus renown, etc. So one thing linguists know is that language change happens and meaning change happens too. So Sally McConnell-Janae has done some work kind of challenging that idea of these components, because we have to think about, well, if there are these set components, how could they possibly change? So first she breaks it down into kind of like what could be part of a word. And she's like, okay, there's like kind of what's in your head, your semantic representation. There's the reference, what the word is pointing to in the world. So Abby Walker points to me. And then also the conceptual baggage a word has. So then when meaning change comes about, Sally McConnell-Janae is interested in where the change is happening. So with the change in the word like marriage, which has been a big like political battle, what has changed is the referent is different, right? So what is being included, and when we're pointing in the world as to what marriage is, the legal definition used to be that it had to be male and female getting married, and now it can be same-sex getting married. But critically, people arguing for this change wanted the conceptual baggage to be pretty similar. So they want marriage to mean the same things that it did when it was for hetero people. They just want that kind of meaning to include more people. So that is what Sally McConnell-Janae would call adaptation change. What about when you want to point to the same thing, but you want the kind of baggage that goes with that to be different? Well, sometimes you get repackaging. So canola oil is rapeseed oil. The word rapeseed, because it sounds like rape, has negative connotations for us. And so what they did was they just kind of introduced a new word to point to the same thing, but that would lose that negative baggage that the word rapeseed has. Sometimes you can get this change in baggage without actually changing the word, and queer is one of the biggest examples of this. So both in the past and nowadays, people could have been using the word queer to point to someone who was gay, but in the past they were doing that with negative connotations, right? Like it was a mean thing to say to someone. And now pointing to the exact same person, you could describe them as queer, and it is a positive, arguably even a neutral thing to say about them. It has an almost matter-of-fact vibe about it to my students. So what Humpty is doing with glory isn't really either of those things, and I think this is why it feels harder, right? So he's kind of describing something that just isn't really about renown and glory. He's describing an argument. So the reference is different. The baggage is different just because it's really an entirely different thing. And so Sally McConnell-Janae would call this invention. Part of what makes this feel harder to kind of grab hold on, right, is that you don't have an anchor in something you know. So if the baggage is changing, but you know the referent, that's less of a change to ask for. But honestly, this isn't that rare. From my perspective, when my students are using the word bet to mean something like cool or yes, I agree, I actually still don't really know what bet means. I have this feeling of kind of like, I recognize that word, but I don't know what you're doing. You've changed all the components for me of what this word is pointing to and what the baggage with that word is. And yet, here we are, all English speakers, and we're using this word differently. Even if we go back to that example that seemed so simple earlier on of girl, think about different ways that you've heard that word being used. I've heard gay men reference other gay men as girl, right? They're not saying that person is a woman, they know it's a man, and they're saying, hey girl, right? So we can lose this female meaning. I've certainly heard people refer to old women as girls, so it can lose that young meaning pretty easily. I've heard people refer to animals as girls, right? So that human meaning doesn't seem so important. In fact, honestly, I've heard people refer to cars as the old girl, etc. The point here is that those kind of like things that feel like the dictionary definitions of words don't seem to be very strongly attached to the word. In fact, Sally McConnell-Janae then argues that part of the reason that words matter so much in our social lives and in political change, etc., is because so little matter is firmly attached to them. I think it would be comforting if this weren't the case, right? That if you could just learn words and their meaning never changed and context never impacted it, right? You just knew all the right things to say. But that's not how language works, right? And so the price of this is kind of eternal vigilance and thinking about how a word has been used before and how it's going to be interpreted when we use it now. So I feel like we're meant to think that Humpty's totally absurd here. But I gotta say, I kind of buy his arguments that words can have lots of different meanings, that the word meaning isn't totally solid, and that who gets to decide are the really interesting questions to ask.